Fellas, this weekend we have Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento as a Fight Night main event, so I'm going to be recapping every single Fight Night main event we've had this year and ranking them on a tier list from S tier being like, this is a great Fight Night main event, I want to replay this, I want to watch it again, and then D tier being, you know, please can we just move on from this Fight Night and never speak about it again. A couple of things I want to clear up. I'm going to be ranking them off performance and hype. So hype, was there a lot of interest going into this Fight Night and did it actually perform? And then obviously, you know, I'm also only going to be including the actual Fight Night main event, so I'm not actually ranking the entire Fight Night as a whole. It's just the main event and how the main event played out. Let me know your thoughts on this tier list and if you agree. Starting off with the first event we had this year and the first Fight Night, obviously. Johnny Walker versus Magomed Ankalaev. I actually really enjoyed this Fight Night. In comparison to the rest of the Fight Night main events we had this year, I'm putting Walker versus Ankalaev in A tier. Yeah, it was a good win by Magomed Ankalaev. He pretty much solidified himself as the #1 contender in the light heavyweight division. It was a fun fight on the feet. There were a few moments in there as well. Johnny Walker doing his crazy shit until eventually Ankalaev was able to land the big shot. And yeah, there's nothing bad I can say about this Fight Night main event. Like I said, solidified Magomed Ankalaev as the #1 contender. If you're a Johnny Walker fan and you're a Magomed Ankalaev hater, probably not the best fight to watch, but no, high level light heavyweight fight as a main event, and it was a good way to kick off the year. We got a finish, I think it was the second round, so yeah, great Fight Night main event there. I'm not going to put it in S tier because, again, it wasn't like there was any insane moments during this. It was kind of just another good finish by Ankalaev. But if we compare this to some of the other Fight Night main events we had this year, it was definitely one of the more solid ones. So, yeah, Walker versus Ankalaev to kick off the year. I'm putting that in straight A tier. Nothing bad I can say about this. Then we've got Dolidze versus Imavov. I'm going to put this in C tier. There was nothing really bad I can say about this. I mean, there was a few good moments in between rounds that are, you know, they're kind of fun to watch, but the fight itself, it just wasn't really that memorable. I guess we got to see Imavov progress as a contender in the middleweight division. Obviously, now he's got a fight booked against Jared Cannonier. The fight itself wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad fight. It was just kind of meh. You know, Dolidze, Imavov, no one really talks about this fight anymore. It's kind of one of those filler fights in the middleweight division that you just want to get out of the way, so then we can start seeing Imavov face actual contenders like Cannonier. You know, it's kind of one of those fights between two fighters between the ranks of like 10 at 5 and 10 that you just want to get out the way. Nothing overly interesting in this fight. Nothing, you know, that people can really talk about in this fight. Nothing special about this fight. Wasn't necessarily, you know, a bad fight. I'm just going to put it in C tier though. Nothing really memorable about this. Then we have Jack Hermansson versus Joe Pyer. I'm putting this in B tier. This was a good fight. It was actually an interesting fight as well. Going into this fight, I was actually really interested because Joe Pyer, he was being hyped up as the Francis Ngannou of the middleweight division. He was a big prospect in the UFC, and he had his biggest fight against Jack Hermansson, who's been around the middleweight division for ages. And Jack Hermansson was able to shut down the prospect. It was also quite satisfying to see Joe Pyer being the guy to be shut down as a prospect of all people, because he had a lot to say. He was a very cocky guy. So to see him lose to Jack Hermansson was actually quite interesting. The fight itself, very good fight on the feet. Very impressive performance by Jack Hermansson. He seems like he's improved a lot. And yeah, very satisfying win there. Glad that Jack Hermansson's back in the winning column. There was a lot of hype going into this event. The fight itself was interesting. There was a few storylines and narratives going in there as well. You've got the up-and-coming prospect taking on the guy's been in the middleweight division for the longest time, and now we get to see Jack Hermansson fight other contenders, which I'm interested to see. So it's built in the hype for Jack Hermansson. Joe Pyer still, you know, he's not completely washed. I mean, he is only a prospect who got shut down. He's got a fight on the McGregor card as well. So yeah, Joe Pyer versus Jack Hermansson. I'm putting that in B tier. Not, you know, an overly amazing Fight Night main event, but to be honest, there isn't anything bad I can say about this. It was actually quite interesting to watch. Then we have UFC Mexico, Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval 2. I'm going to put this one in A tier as well. I mean, I feel like this could be kind of, I know I'm only ranking the main events, but I feel like the event might have subconsciously pushed this high because this was a really, really good Fight Night main event. It felt like one of those UFC 301 cards where it was like, it wasn't overly stacked, and I know this was a Fight Night and that was a pay-per-view, but you've got a flyweight headline, you've got a decent card as well. But if we're talking about purely just a main event, it was in front of a crowd, which none of these other Fight Nights had, which definitely has to boost it. Any Fight Night with a crowd ahead of it definitely boosts them, in my opinion. And the fight itself was really interesting because, again, the underdog won in this fight. Brandon Royval was able to take out Brandon Moreno. The whole narrative going into this fight was, oh, Brandon Moreno's going to beat Royval, and then maybe down the line we can see a fourth fight with Pantoja which wasn't the case. Moreno looked off in that fight, or maybe Royval was just that good. But yeah, Royval was piecing him up on the feet. It was a very, very close fight. It wasn't like he completely shut down Moreno. It's a back-and-forth fight on the feet. Really interesting striking matchup. There was a lot of hype. It performed. Great Fight Night main event. So Moreno versus Royval 2 is a Fight Night main event. I'm putting that in A tier. I really enjoyed this event. And yeah, there's just nothing bad I can say about this. It was a really good fight between two flyweights. It kind of solidified Royval as the #1 contender. Well, he's either going to be fighting for the belt next, or he's going to be in actually another #1 contender fight. But it was a really impressive win from Royval, especially when nobody expected to win after his last performance a few months back against Pantoja. So yeah, Royval versus Moreno 2 is going in A tier. Then we have Rosenstrike versus Gaziev. I'm putting this in straight S tier. This has probably been the most interesting Fight Night main event that I've watched this year because of how funny it was. I mean, what was it, like 20 seconds into the fight where Rosenstrike runs in and headbutts the cage, nearly breaks his neck. I was dying during this fight, and I think everyone was not seeing this as a serious fight because obviously Gaziev had one fight in the UFC. Yeah, this was just a really comedic fight to watch overall. Two fat heavyweights going in there and putting on a barn burner. Rosenstrike looked a little bit off at the beginning, and Gaziev seemed to be the one pushing the pace, and then towards the end of the fight, that's where we got to see Rosenstrike completely overwhelm Gaziev, which was bound to happen. It's his second fight in the UFC, and he's got a Fight Night main event. This was a really, really funny fight night to watch. I've rewatched this so many times as well. Just watching a prospect in Gaziev get shut down as well. It was also quite interesting, and listen, I don't want to sound like I'm overly hating on Dagestanis, especially with a recent video that I posted, but it was interesting to see a Dagestani fighter quit in the corner, especially after Dagestanis love to bring up how other fighters quit against guys like Khabib and Islam. So watching a Dagestani fighter quit was kind of interesting as well. But no, funny fight night, and fair play to Rosenstrike for getting this, getting the win. It was actually a really interesting fight to watch, and I've replayed this countless times now. Probably my favourite experience when watching a fight this year. Two blobs going at it, so I really enjoyed that. Talking of two blobs, Tuivasa versus Marcin Tabura. Listen, I'm a big Tuivasa fan, and even though the fight would probably belongs in A tier or maybe S tier, I'm going to have to put it in B tier. If the roles were reversed and that was Tuivasa doing that to Tabura, listen, I have nothing against Tabura. I would have probably put that in A tier, but watching Tuivasa get finished a fourth time in a row is never a fun thing to see, because it's got to the point where a few years ago he was a contender fighting for a #1 contender fight, and now we're getting talks of him. If he loses another fight, he's probably going to get cut from the UFC. And I feel like this was the most disappointing loss of Tuivasa, because before he'd lost to Volkov, Garn and Pavlovich, and those are all top heavyweights. I guess there's no shame in that. And then losing to Tabura, and I know Tabura is probably one of the better fat heavyweights out there, but still, to lose in the fashion that he did in the first round, at least it wasn't a boring fight between two slow-paced fat heavyweights. It wasn't like we got a boring fight. It was actually a really high-action fight until eventually Tabura got the finish, and that's why I can't put it in C or D tier. I got to give it the respect. It was a good fight, but as a Tuivasa fan, it was never fun to watch, so I'm going to have to put it in B tier for that. Then we have Ribas versus Namajunas. Yeah, this is going in C tier as well. I mean, what can you really say about this fight night? It was a close fight. Namajunas got the win, and she's back in the win column. She's not going to get near a belt for the rest of her career because she's looked horrible against every other fight recently. So yeah, that's literally all I can say about this Fight Night main event. Namajunas looked decent on the feet. She seemed like she'd improved since her fight before, but it wasn't overly impressive because Ribas was actually firing back too, to the point where it was actually a really close. There's just not much you can say about this fight. It was a pretty boring fight. It wasn't overly interesting. It's a C tier. Pretty weak main event as well, a women's main event, having Namajunas headline a main event for a fight night, when previously I'm pretty sure she lost in a fight night to obviously a Furo as well, so nothing overly impressive here. C tier. But D tier, that's preserved for Furo versus Blackfield. The reason this is going in D tier is because, first of all, this fight was hyped up as, oh, this is one of the better women's fights of the year. This is one of the women's fights you actually want to tune into. And I was bought on it because they both looked great recently. They both of them deserved a title shot, to be honest, at the time. So for both of them to be fighting each other, this is kind of like the Shavkat Rakhmonov versus JDM of their division. But it absolutely did not deliver. Blackfield looked like Ben Askren on the feet. She looked like Ronda Rousey Part 2 on the feet, throwing with her wrists. Furo was able to get the win. Good win for Furo, but it wasn't an interesting fight. It was a really, really boring fight. And I feel like because the hype died down, and it's a women's main event, like I said, I know there was quite a bit of hype going into this specific women's fight, but it wasn't like there was hype for the Fight Night main event, full stop. It was mainly just hype because it's one of the better female fights we've had this year, and it didn't perform. It let let everyone who was, you know, absolutely hyped on this fight down. It was probably, yeah, it was a terrible Fight Night main event. Probably the worst one we've watched this year. I never really had high expectations for women MMA, but somehow I still got disappointed by this fight. D tier. Then we've got Allan versus Curtis 2. I'm going to put this in S tier too. Yeah, obviously Curtis stepping in on short notice when Vettori was supposed to be facing Allan. This was a really interesting fight. It was one of the best, I'd say, out of every fight on this list, this has probably been the best fight. It was back and forth. It was a slobber knocker. It was a fun fight to watch. I really enjoyed watching this fight. It was like I said, a very, very close fight. Curtis did really well, especially for the fact that he was fighting heavily up the rankings and he stepped in on short notice. Curtis's boxing looked great in this fight. Brendan Allen being able to mix it up was really interesting as well. Brendan Allen kind of solidified himself as another contender in the middleweight division. There's a lot of contenders at middleweight right now, but Allen, I'm sure he's going to get a big fight soon. So Allan versus Curtis 2. Honestly, really fun fight to watch. I've watched these back a few times as well. Fun scrap in the middleweight division, and to headline a fight night, it really ended off what was a decent fight now. So Allan versus Curtis 2, fair play to both of them. It was a really fun scrap. Both did really well in every aspect of MMA. I've got to put that in S tier. And then finally, the most recent one, Nicolau versus Perez. I'm going to put this in A tier. It can't really get higher than A tier than when this was one of the most shat-on fight nights of the year. I mean, this was kind of, especially after UFC 300, you know, it was the post-nut clarity after UFC 300. This did not deserve to be a fight night main event. But you know what? Fair play for Perez for getting that knockout when no one really gave him a chance, especially when previously, a few months back on the Gaziev card, he'd lost to Mohamed Makayev. Most people expected Perez to get round through in a boring decision, but it actually came out to be a very technical fight until Perez got the KO. Fair play to Perez. I still don't know how he's ranked higher than Makayev when Makayev beat him a few months ago. But yeah, A tier, very good main event, especially for the fact that it was shat on. It exceeded expectations. And yeah, that is my ranking for every single fight night main event so far this year. Let me know if you'd agree with these rankings or you'd switch anything around. Remember, I'm not ranking the fight nights, I'm only ranking the main events themselves, and maybe Rodrigo Nascimento versus Derek Lewis can make it on, you know, maybe an A tier or S tier. I don't predict it to be an amazing fight, but we'll see. Let me know your thoughts on this tier list, and thank you for watching.